It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Scott Cook, who's being inducted into the Bay Area Business Council Hall of Fame. As most of you know, Scott is the founder and currently the chairman of the executive committee of Intuit. As you'll see in the video in a few minutes, he founded Intuit originally as a software project to solve his wife's hassles with balancing the family checkbooks. That grew into Quicken, and Intuit was born 31 years ago. Actually, it was quite a struggle in the early years. The VCs refused to invest in the company. The business had a hard time getting momentum, and they were a whisker away from failing twice. Things eventually improved. I first met Scott 25 years ago. It was in late 1989. I was a partner of Warburg Pincus, which was in the process of buying a single product, small tax company called TurboTax. And in order to save funds, we and Intuit were going to split the cost of a 30-second American Airlines in-flight ad. I should point out that the founder of TurboTax, Chipsoft, was a programmer. We had no marketing department. I'm sitting in my office in New York, and one day, one of my younger partners comes in and says, "The Quicken guy's in the back." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you know we're sharing this ad." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I think he's being polite, but I think he's really concerned that it's going to be embarrassing when the ad comes up and they're running right next to it, so he's helping us." So I go in the back, and there is Scott teaching Marketing 101 to a bunch of New York finance types. That's when I met Scott. What I learned just listening at that time 25 years ago was that not only was he a great businessman, but he had incredibly high standards for quality and the customer experience, and the generosity of his spirit enabled him to lead by teaching and coaching, and through his enthusiasm and brilliance, inspired others. 5 years later, the two companies actually merged, resulting in the combination of two software companies, each doing slightly in excess of $100 million in revenues. Today, Intuit has over $4 billion in revenues, over $1 billion in profits, extremely high market shares in each of its major businesses, a top 10 ranking in best places to work in the United States, and extremely high net promoter scores. Scott ran Intuit for the first 11 years, carrying the company through its IPO, its acquisition of TurboTax, and at one point when the two companies were put together, the total surprise of the board of directors, Scott walks into a board meeting and says he's decided in order for the company to really achieve its potential, it needed someone to complement his skills who'd been there before to lead a company. And in order to make room for such a person, he would step down as CEO. And I think most people think Scott's been running the company forever. I think there are days where some people still think that's true, but he has had a succession of 3 great CEOs, each one of whom he recruited with the board to join the company. Bill Campbell, who you all know, Steve Bennett, and now Brad Smith, who you'll hear from in a video in a few minutes. Today, Scott's chairman of the executive committee of the board, active in the company on a full-time basis, providing vision, inspiration, and strategic leadership to the company as it pursues new technologies and new businesses. Since the launch of Quicken, Scott was instrumental in guiding Intuit into new businesses such as QuickBooks. And today, 25% of the US GDP flows through QuickBooks. I might add, 40% of all taxes in this country are filed on Intuit tax software. Throughout, Scott has been the driving force behind Intuit's strategy to revolutionize people's financial lives using the marketing techniques that he learned at Procter & Gamble. He's also well known for being the first person to apply these techniques from consumer marketing to software in new ways, including usability testing of products and follow me home, so he'd know exactly what customers were doing with the product. During this period, Intuit has transitioned from a software company to a web-based company with a SaaS business model operating globally on all platforms, including mobile. And Scott is actively engaged with the senior management in executing against the company's two long-term goals: do the nation's taxes and be the operating system behind small business success. Today, Scott serves on the boards of Procter & Gamble, eBay, the Harvard Business School Dean's Advisory Board, the Center for Brand and Product Management at the University of Wisconsin, and the Intuit Scholarship Fund. And he personally funds social entrepreneurs in education and medical research. Scott also has a wonderful family. He and Signe, who you will hear from in a few minutes in a video, have been married over 30 years, and they have 3 great children: David, who's here this evening, Annie, who you'll see in the video, and Carl, who is not able to join us today. As I reflect on the honor which you're about ready to bestow on Scott, I think about what makes him a special businessman. He's an entrepreneur who's faced existential risk. He's coached, mentored, inspired 3 great CEOs over 20 years. He's worn many hats himself, all very well. He describes himself as still nerdy as an adult. I think a more apt term would be intellectual, whose intellectual enthusiasm is contagious. Throughout all this, he's personally humble and unpretentious, but don't make a mistake for thinking that's a lack of confidence in his own thinking. He's a visionary with a voracious curiosity who can be incredibly incisive, analytical, and motivational, and instilled in others the relentless commitment to great products and has been the champion of customer-driven innovation. His legacy is embedded throughout and deep in the Intuit organization. Scott is a great example that there are many different ways and styles to build a great company. He's a great friend and a pleasure to work with, and I thank you all for selecting him for the Hall of Fame Award. Thank you.
There's an aphorism I've heard that behind every successful entrepreneur is a supportive spouse and surprised in-laws.
We were newly married, and I kept 3 separate accounts. We had my own checking account, we had our joint checking account, and he had his checking account. And I would basically reconcile all the checkbooks, once a month and pay all the bills. And I was sitting there and just getting very exasperated trying to find the last little penny or dime to make sure that they completely balanced. And I was just always in a bad mood at that time when I was doing it. And he said, I think could be a product that would work well to help balance this and make it really easy. And the family joke was he thought he could design it in about 3 weekends, and then it would be a great product for me to use.
I would not be in the business, and Intuit would not be here were it not for Signe.
The breakthrough that he had was coming up with a design of a product that really fit the needs of what customers actually wanted to do with the product, and delivered it in an easy-to-use way.
He was very ahead of his time in terms of customer-driven development. So observing customers, not just doing market research, but going out with ethnography and watching customers in the wild, follow me homes, as they were called, and then bringing them and those insights into the development process so the customers actually help you design and develop the product.
There were many points during the early days of Intuit when both he and Signe would have given you the entire company. A lot of his early hopes and aspirations or thoughts about how it was going to work turned out to be absolutely false, yet was mindful of how hard the journey was and how many things he would have to accomplish to make it an important company.
We were not building a company for just the first product. Instead, we wanted to build a company capable of inventing and reinventing for future customers and future problems to solve and future products.
We all share that philosophy that Scott talks about, which is I believe corporations and companies exist because they have social permission, they have a social contract that they're going to leave the communities in which they operate and the world in which they do business better than they found them.
If companies stop overtly and obviously improving people's lives through their work, enabling people to live a better life now than they did 5 or 10 years ago, when companies stop doing that, they're giving up on their role in society.
And so it's our job to basically improve the well-being of the customers that we serve and the communities in which we do business.
His strength in leadership doesn't come from his ability to take control and lead, but it comes from his ability to empower the people surrounding him to lead, which I think is really cool and really important.
He has helped us create a culture where all ideas are simply a hypothesis that can be tested, and it doesn't matter that he's the founder of the company. It doesn't matter that he was the CEO 20 years ago, and it doesn't matter that he's got this track record that nobody argues with, where he has had repeated success after success of completely changing a category or an industry.
And I'd say if I've learned something in the last 10 years about innovation, agility, success, about growing your people, it's to embrace experiments whenever possible.
The other thing about him that makes him so successful, and something that I try to emulate, is his willingness to go deep and really try to understand what a person is saying. So instead of a gut reaction saying, no, that's not right, he'll just try to really understand where you're coming from. And I think that is terrific. And when I see him do that, I can see how effective it can be. I try to use it with my kids. To greater or lesser success at times.
Scott is perhaps the most grounded, highly successful person you'll ever meet. I go backpacking with him and every year for a week, and he's always the first one to jump in with mundane chores like washing dishes because he's a team player and he really enjoys people, and he's not happy if he's not participating and contributing.
He's definitely really hardworking, and he always puts other people first, which is something that I try and do, but I'm not as good as him. He is good at a work-life balance where he can be doing his work 1 minute and then just switch into being with us. We could be at a horse show because my brother and I rode horses competitively, and if we weren't in the show ring, he was doing his work, but the second we were in the ring, he was watching us and filming us.
One of the wonderful things about Scott is the fact that he does not want his picture on the wall or his name on buildings. He does not want the limelight. He shies away from that kind of thing.
I went to him and said that as a part of the 30th anniversary, it would really be my honor and the company's honor if we could name our campus center after him. And he struggled with that. He did not want Intuit to have a campus center or a building named after him. But upon reflection, he came back and said, I'll cut you a deal. Can we call it the Cook Campus Center, and inside can I put a plaque in honor of my father, who believed in us and gave us money even when he didn't have money to give, and he didn't even know what a PC was and had never typed in his life, because it was him that gave us the ability to become the company that we are, not me.
I don't think we have made it yet. Progress happens by steps. And the reason you want a grand challenge is to help those steps align to something that when it's solved, as you get there, will really be important to the world. The things we will do that will change more people's lives more profoundly are still in front of us. I got to ask, did something good happen in the game? I'm overcome. Well, let me say thank you for coming. Do you know what it's like to stand in front of an audience, all of whom want to be somewhere else? approach this with a lot of apprehension. This whole thing is, as Gary knows, but especially the video. And I couldn't put a finger on my feeling until last week when I saw a guy say that familiarity may not breed contempt, but it certainly takes the edge off admiration. Now, for those of you who've been on the inside of an organization, one thing you know is that leaders get the credit that others deserve. And that is so true. It's the others who've made all of this happen for which somehow I got to be on stage for. You know, Signe, who was actually in software first before I was. As you know the story, this would not be here but for her and for the advice she gave to help me figure out how to start this thing. Yes, Signe. And being the phenomenal mother, when I might have been distracted by a thing or two or three, being the phenomenal mother to David, to Carl, and to Annie, and they've turned out just fantastic. But also to my advisor for life, Chris, to my friends for life, Jay and John, who you saw up there, to my friends who I bike with who are here, to my co-founder, Tom. And if you don't have the right person with you when you start something, it'll never work. Thank goodness for Tom, who started with me when he was still a student. To the great CEOs that you heard Chris describe, who are so much better running the place than I would ever be. To Bill Campbell, who, for those of you who know him, now seems to have survived cancer and was in our board meeting today full of piss and vinegar, just like Bill always is. To Steve, and now to Brad Smith, who you saw, who's the most phenomenal leader I've ever met. I know that there are two words that audiences most want to hear, especially tonight. In conclusion, let's go to our cleanup batters.
I hope you can find a place in your trophy case for that. It's really pretty special. It is pretty neat. Congratulations.